it was a movie that already has like a tarnished reputation. Like I was trying to come into, kind of, revive it, resuscitate it, like show people, that it deserves a second look. And, and I hope that comes across.
Max, congrats on this book, man. I finished it yesterday. It
Oh,
did.
you read the whole thing?
I did, man. I was so curious. I mean, and I loved, from moment one, I could hear your voice in it, and it never stopped, even as you were going into this great detail of history. So, congrats on it. Now, you mentioned in your foreword that you had a run-in with a director who was once attached to direct it, and that sort of sparked an interest in doing something like this. But was that the catalyst for you to get this going, or was there another part in your life in which you said, you know what, I'm going to get this going?
I've been doing what you do for so long. I've been doing it for like 18 years. And at a certain point I was, you get a little tired of the grind of just like pushing out 300 word, aggregate articles about this, that, and the other thing, or doing like, sort of hollow interviews. They're not always hollow, but sometimes they are. And yeah, like, I liked the idea of, instead of, doing something so superficial, of really, just doing the deepest dive humanly possible into just one movie. It was just like, it's the total opposite of how I'd been trained, of how I'd been making my living. And yeah, it taught me a lot. It taught me that, like, yeah, like, once you start digging, you're just scratching the surface, and there's so much, there's so many more multitudes, especially to a movie like this, which had such a sprawling cast, and, it was such a huge production. I think by today's standards, Dune would have been at least $150 million movie. Yeah, I mean, it was at the time the most expensive movie Universal had ever made. So it was a biggie. And, the fact that it had been kind of remanded to, a cultural artifact or a footnote in David Lynch's career, made it all the more enticing, because it's like, it's like the little kid on the playground that nobody wants to talk to. That kid's got, like, whatever, like a secret clubhouse in the woods or something. And there's this, this movie contains multitudes. Dune contains multitudes. And yeah, and what's funny is originally the book was only supposed to be 150 pages. And I was only supposed to take 7 or 8 months to do it. And then as the momentum built, and as I started getting more and more interviews, my publisher was like, okay, take your time, like, do this right. And yeah, and that's how, and then eventually it got David and Kyle, and the momentum really, built to the point where I felt like I could get kind of a holistic view of the whole movie, somebody from every department. And yeah, and that's what I wound up with. That's why I wound up with a 560 page book. And then the last thing I'll say is it was almost 700 pages, because I wrote it all in Word, and the draft I turned in Word was about 400 pages. And then they told me that when it was laid out, it would be 700 pages. And I'm like, oh no, that's too much book. And, like, they told me the spine would literally break if it was that long. So I had to cut like over 100 pages out. But it was all crap. You don't need it. What's left in the book is all the good stuff.
So this is the Max Evry cut of the book?
Yeah. I mean, not to say I wouldn't mind doing a special edition, a director's cut, a final cut, a super final cut, whatever. Like, I mean, I have dug up other stuff that I wish I'd put in the book since finishing the book. So, like, I talked to my publisher about it, and he says, like, yeah, we can throw some of that good stuff in, if we do a paperback edition or whatever, something where, I mean, I think if I add much more, you could, like, kill a person with this book. It's so big. It weighs 3 pounds. Did you know that?
I didn't know. I haven't gotten my copy yet, so I haven't gotten the chance to feel the heft of it. But I mean, 560 pages alone is already pretty heavy. That's awesome that it's at least something that you wanted to do. And
yeah, I guess I didn't want my only legacy as a movie journalist to be like 3 new character posters for Mordecai or whatever.
well, especially now with Mordecai. Um, Now, you mentioned that it sounds like Kyle and David's interviews came later in the game of putting this book together. So, I mean, where did you start with interviews leading up to those ones?
Not only was David not the first person I approached, I never intended on talking to David ever. Like I just assumed I wasn't going to get him. There are other people that tried that had done documentaries and things like that, and they didn't even come close. And it was actually in searching for Kyle that I found a contact. They're like, "Oh, you want to talk to Kyle? Talk to this person." And then I'm like, "Oh, this person might be able to help me with David." So that's how David ultimately came about. And I think without David, I wouldn't have gotten nearly as many people as I did, because it kind of gave the book some authenticity. It's like, oh, this is for real. Like it had his seal of approval, and it's a movie he doesn't like to talk about. It's a sore spot for him. But yeah, no, but the process of interviewing started with people who were lower on the food chain, art directors, DGA trainees, and it's like, and then you build from that. But it's like those people in and of themselves were fascinating to talk to, because it's always kind of like the below the line people who can give you a little bit more dirt. They're a little less media trained, or maybe they just don't give a fuck. And also it's been 40 years. So it's like, and they can really be a little more honest. It's like, it's why the book is kind of balanced between sort of, above the line people and a few below the line people. Another thing that I was really pleasantly surprised by was some of the studio executives that I talked to, because a lot of times when people are writing books about films, they tend to bypass executives. And now I don't even know why they do that, because obviously there's this perception that it's like filmmaker is David, executives is Goliath, and it's like they're like sort of they're the opposition of art or whatever. But the truth is, like, the executives are the ones that greenlight all these films. The executives are the ones that nurture the relationships with talent and support the talent while they're making the films. And those guys like Tom Mount and Frank Price that I talked to, like they had so many insights into the film, and they had their own frustrations with the process, and their own things that they were trying to fight and push back on and stuff. That stuff to me was really refreshing. I mean, what did you think about that aspect of the book?
I was actually going to say, I did love hearing or reading, I should say, Tom and Frank's insight on the movie, but I also did love how candid everybody was in their interviews with you. And that's something that I feel really comes from having a place of trust with the interviewer as well. Being an interviewer myself. And I'm curious how you already had a good history of that with the profession that we shared. But I mean, how do you go about fostering that level of trust with someone you're interviewing, whether it be for a one-time interview or for multiple interviews?
I think it's really important to do your research. So like every interview I did, I would do at least 2 or 3 hours of prep in terms of, trying to come up with questions, trying to phrase the questions in a way that's not, fanboyish or insulting or anything like that. And also you have to have a certain degree of integrity. Like you can't be digging for gossip. Sometimes somebody will just throw something at you and you'll be like, okay, you did not say off the record, but yeah, I was never digging for dirt, in fact, in some cases, some people would tell me things that like, I think a less scrupulous writer, that would have been the first thing that they glommed onto. And for me, I was like, no, I'm not that may be interesting, because it's like whatever, scandalous or whatever. But it's like if it didn't have anything to do, it didn't have a direct connection with the movie. If it was just about so and so is this and so, the kind of gossipy stuff, I toss that stuff aside. So I think people could sense that. People can sense that I wasn't trying to. I wasn't trying to, add insult to injury. It was a movie that already has like a tarnished reputation. Like I was trying to come into, kind of, revive it, resuscitate it. Like show people, that it deserves a second look. And I hope that comes across.
Now, going off of that actually led into another question I had for you, which is, I mean, this was a multi-year process for you. You started this, I believe, before Denis movie came out, or at least around the time it was announced that he was making it. And obviously a lot more people have now put their eyes on Lynch's Dune, and there seems to be a little more appreciation for it from audiences, at least. And being a big fan yourself, I mean, how does it feel to see that public favor start to turn, over the years?
I think a lot of that has to do, directly with Denis movie and Denis movie reviving interest in the property itself. I mean, it is a property that's never been quite dormant, although it's never reached like Star Wars, Star Trek level stratosphere, but like, yeah, there was the miniseries, there video games, there have been, lots and lots of books by Brian Herbert, they've been keeping the IP alive for a long time, but Villeneuve's movie took it to another level. And then once it came out, I think a lot of people were curious about the Lynch movie, and this is what I'll say, because I don't want to tarnish what Villeneuve did, but I think the big difference between the two is I think Villeneuve was trying to make the most accessible and commercial version of Dune possible, and I think Lynch was trying to do the opposite, like not make an anti-commercial movie, but to make a movie that leaned into the strangeness of the book and the foreign feeling of the book, just dropping you in media res into this really strange, far, far, far off future where, there's all this terminology and, customs and cultures and, stuff. And then, trying to convey a lot of that visually, just the way he differentiated the four worlds of the film, Arrakis, Caladan, Kytane, and Gidi Prime. Every one of those cultures has a different look, a different feel. And, and I think, the Villeneuve version, as striking as it is, is a little bit more visually samey, and for whatever that's where it's just a lot of the sets are very brutalist and compositions are very these big landscape compositions, and and that's cool. That's just a different flavor. But I prefer the more eccentric vision of Lynch.
I do feel he brings a certain level of surrealness to it in comparison to Villeneuve that compares maybe a little more favorably towards Lynch's for certain sequences. So I can agree with that. Now, in speaking about the look, actually, I love how in depth you went down to the visual effects, the light flecks, all of that stuff. And interestingly enough, though, a lot of times when I've read oral histories, they will include images to help reference that. And your book is very, I don't like choosing about what images to use and when to use them. And I'm curious how you went about that, what your process was behind doing that. Because obviously you don't want this to just be some picture book, but at the same time, it's interesting to see some of these visuals in there.
Yeah, and I wish it had been more integrated in the sense that like if you hear somebody talking about something, you're looking at a photograph of it. I wish it was more integrated, but I think our timeline was such that like we kind of had to crunch, and we had to just put all the images into one section, and then there's a few scattered throughout where I thought it was basically, they asked me like, what is really essential to see like right here, and I had to pick and choose, just because like every time you add a photo to layout, it's a house of cards. So yeah, like we just, that was more of a logistical thing than a creative thing. If I do a paperback version, I would love for there to be more images. There also wasn't enough time to clear a lot of the images that I had access to. Like I had so much cool like storyboards and production paintings and stuff that I would have loved to do. I mean, honestly, I feel like there could be a whole other book just on the art of, I know that Giles Masters, who's the production designer, Tony Masters' son, and who also worked on the film. He has a lot of his father's stuff, work from the film in storage in London, and it would be great if he and Ron Miller and some of the other art department guys got together and did just a whole book that's the art of, because there's so much material, there's so much great material that was thrown out too, just for because the movie its eyes were bigger than its stomach. And especially towards the end when it came time for the visual effects, as you read.
It was a tricky one to put together, that movie, but at the same time, an art companion book for you, I think, would be great for this, because I mean, the going from pre-production to production to post-production, I can imagine how many images, like you say, you either didn't get cleared or you had to throw out. So that would be exciting to see. Now, in coming back to the interviews, though, I mean, again, I mentioned how it was refreshingly candid. A lot of them were, but was there anyone who you were really surprised about, being invested in the conversation or conversations with you?
The fact that it is so candid is a testament to the fact that this was an independently produced book. This was not a studio sanctioned book. This wasn't even sanctioned by the De Laurentiis organization. Even though Raffaella participated and Lynch participated, it wasn't. It was my own thing. Nobody told me what to do. Nobody told me what to cut out. Nobody said, "Oh, can I approve this or that?" It was all like they gave me what they wanted. If somebody said off the record is sacred to me, and I would listen to them, and I would bite my hand. I wish I could put that in the book, but that's sacred to me. And like one of the most candid people, which I'm sure if you read the book, he's like an MVP, is Bob Ringwood, the costume designer. He's so like, and he's great because he didn't do it in a mean-spirited way. Like he's not mean-spirited, and I think it comes across that he really does respect David and respect Raffaella and respect everybody that he worked with on the film. But he didn't mince words, and he was very honest about a lot of the things that went wrong, and he is I think still very upset about how everything went pear-shaped, went foobar. And I don't blame him, because I think, the work that he did was, singularly incredible. Like those are some of the greatest costumes I've ever seen in any movie, period. Like not just a sci-fi movie, like any movie. Like those are incredible costumes, and just the still suit alone, we get into a little bit about how like the still suit is in many ways like the forefather of the modern superhero costume. Because like Ringwood's work on Batman and then subsequently on X-Men, those are two defining movies for the superhero genre, and the still suit was a direct link to those. You can even see like the first Batman costume is very visually similar to the still suit.
Yeah, I mean that still suit. I mean, you can even see it in Denis' movie. I mean, it obviously it has a source in the book, but at the same time, I mean, the way Bob brings it to life in the original, you can clearly see they drew so much from that for the new movie. So his work is incredible. And yeah, I always got the sense he was being humorous more than he was trying to be mean to anybody in your interviews. So I loved to see it. Now, given that this was a multi-year journey for you, I mean, some writers could get discouraged at points, with the mounting pressure of having something this big. And so I'm curious if there were any moments like that for you, and if so, how you pushed through them.
I think it was just, the foolish naivete of having never done a book before. And, I started out just happy to be there. And then by the end, like, it's like I went from happy to be there to, oh, this could be something, to, oh, this is a real book now, to, I think by the end I was like, I need to make this the last Dune book. Like, no, but I want to make it like a scorched earth thing, so no one could ever write another book about this movie. It was like, that's sort of where I was. That was my journey. Humble as it may be. And I don't know if that's true. I'm sure there's many more great books to be written about David Lynch's Dune, but if you were trying to do a book like mine, which is like a historical document, basically, like, I think you'd have your work cut out for you, because you'd have to talk to everybody I talked to and then some. So, and it was a lot of work, and it was, I would love to write another book, but I don't know if I would ever go into another book again just blind, like I did with this, like not knowing if I was going to get a single person. My publisher was like, we'll be happy if you get 2 or 3 people from the movie. So I'm glad I was able to push past that. And but yeah, when you're without a net, when you're without a guarantee that you're going to get any of the key people, and I mean, like, but and would I have liked to get Patrick Stewart? Would I have liked to get Sting? Would I have liked, I can name you, a dozen people just off the top of my head I would have loved to have gotten. But the fact is, the people that I got were so generous to talk to me, because they're under no obligation to talk about this movie. They're under no contract anymore. And they, in some cases they're retired. It's like, it's some of the people I talk to are in their 90s. And it's like they're under no obligation to talk to me, but they did. And I saw that, so I have to just, I have to thank them all, because it's, now fans can read this book and they'll have a much clearer idea, not only, why it turned out the way it did, but also what it could have been.
I think it's great that you got the people you did. So many of them offered so much amazing insight. I will say, though, when I was reading the pre-production part of it, Val Kilmer was someone who I would have loved to have heard some insight on for this book, because just the amount of stories that you were getting from people about him, I was like, would have loved to have heard that. But maybe another book, or maybe just a follow up for the special edition, like you say.
It would be great to talk to Val. I did reach out at one point, but I don't know if I followed up. And the problem with this, having this many people involved, is it's like, it's hard to even remember like who I've reached out to already, who I've followed up with. In some cases it took 4 or 5 tries. for some people, and then, there were some people I just couldn't, I just couldn't follow through on. I would have loved to have also talked to, Michael Biehn and, some of the other, I did reach out to a few of the other people who auditioned to play Paul. I got a couple of them. So
you got Zach Galligan.
I got Zach Galligan. I got Dexter Fletcher. I got Ken Brannon. So it's like, yeah. I mean, and then that's a delicate thing too. Like when you're talking to an actor about a role they didn't get, it's like it's a tough pill to swallow sometimes. So that, like in the case of Zach Galligan, I felt very comfortable with it just because I knew that he came out on top there with getting Gremlins over getting Dune. That was definitely a better get for him.
I'm sure it pained you to say that, but yes, in a sense, yes, it was the better get. Well, before we wrap this up, now that you've dipped your toes into this field, I know you also do a lot of commentaries for, I think, Arrow Video. If I'm not
Arrow, Kino, Kino Lorber, Via Vision, Imprints. I just did my first one for Indicator. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of them. They're really fun.
So now that you've really entrenched yourself in these different fields, especially the book, though, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you don't know if you'd go into another book without maybe a little more preparation. So would you do another oral history like this on a film in the future?
Somebody asked me like a similar question, and I was like, I would love to see an oral history of Michael Mann's The Keep, like, because that's very similar to Dune. It would make a great sort of companion to Dune because it was a similar thing. Like they had, the film was heavily truncated to the point that it didn't make sense, and the effects guy, in Dune's case, the effects guy pulled out. In the Keep's case, the effects guy, Wally Vevers, died. And they were kind of left scrambling. But I love The Keep. I would love to do a book about The Keep. I just did a commentary for Michael Mann's Black Hat. But again, I would only do a book about Michael Mann's The Keep, just as an example. I would only do that if I knew Michael Mann to do it from the get-go. Like if I didn't have to like just hope and pray for 2 years that I got Michael Mann. Because it is nerve wracking. It is, not knowing if you have the book or not. But I think you have to. There's certain movies you have to get it from the horse's mouth. Otherwise, why bother?
I remember when I saw your reference to Michael Mann's The Keep in the book, I was like, man, Max has been telling me to watch this movie forever, and I had just not gotten around to it. So it was almost a reminder for me to do that, as well as just like, I know he's passionate about this movie. I could see him doing something with that. I also think, I mean, for me personally, I don't know if you have much interest in it, but Event Horizon, given how crazy of a thing that movie turned out to be, I think that could be a fun one to do in this field. But obviously, something that you're passionate about first and foremost. So
yeah, and Giles Masters was the art director on Event Horizon.
That's right.
I
remember seeing you, or I remember looking it up after the fact and noting that. Yeah, that's there. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and Tony Masters, his father, was the guy that originated the tablet in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which Tony designed. They have tablets. And then they have tablets again in Dune, and then they have tablets again in Event Horizon. So that's a family thing there. That the precursor to the tablet is seen in all these films. But and by the way, I don't blame you for having not seen The Keep, because it is, for all intents and purposes, out of circulation by design. Because I think Michael Mann is like deliberately withholding it. He's just like, no, don't put that out.
I want to get my hands on it one day, because I mean, I know it's got that cult following, so I check it out myself. But In the meantime, I'm really excited to spread the word about this book, man. I know we wrote the excerpt for you, and we got the giveaway
Thank
coming
you.
up, but it's exciting stuff. And it's opened up my eyes to really go back and I didn't hate Lynch's Dune by any means, but at the same time, I was polarized by it, and now I go back and really dig into those layers a little deeper now that I have all that context, and I hope people do the same. When they read the book.
Yeah. It's like Mark Bennett, who runs Dune Info. He has this great quote in the book where he says, like, Dune is like the Venus de Milo. You have to admire it for what it is, not for what's not there.
That's so pretty good.
Yeah, but the most amazing thing about David Lynch's Dune is that I have discovered in the process of writing this book and then putting the book out is like, there is a real, Richard Nixon silent majority out there who really love this movie, and I'm glad that after all these years they can finally get a real full meal about the movie.
You gave them probably about 2 meals.
At least leftovers for days.
Exactly.